Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for downloading Sound Bites on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen. This is Season 2, Episode 8. Today's show is all about magnesium. We touched on a couple of different vitamins, vitamin B9 and B12 so far, and now we're going to dive into one mineral called magnesium. I find that this one, I think, is underrated. I think people hear that they need to supplement with it a lot, but they don't really know why. And also, it's one that I see commonly deficient in the body too. But the thing about magnesium is that it's definitely essential for a healthy and well-functioning body. But I do want to state here, because I think on this podcast, we're focusing both on health, but we're also focusing on sports performance. There's definitely research that's been done to see if magnesium can boost athletic performance, and a lot of those just fell short. So like magnesium just doesn't seem to directly have something to do with athletic performance, but magnesium is a precursor to optimal performance in a way. You're like, health is your precursor to optimal performance. And so magnesium and some of these vitamins and minerals, if you need them in order to have a healthy body. So if we want to have your best performance, we also want to try to encourage your body to be healthy and all your systems to be functioning as well. So that's actually why I typically encourage people to, and especially every athlete, to look at magnesium and the role that it generally plays, so that in so many different of the functions that your body performs. And not only that, but it also helps us consider muscle health as well. And we're going to talk about that today. Because you've also potentially heard about it too. Magnesium tends to help with like spasms, and it can help with muscle cramps. And so we're going to talk again a little bit about why that is, and also how it does that in the body. What's also interesting is that I typically see, I can see both blatant forms of magnesium deficiency, like what we see on a lab, but I also sometimes see something like what I would call a functional deficiency, where we add in magnesium and symptoms just typically improve, but it wasn't just, blatant on a urine or blood test. And I think, and again, you're going to also hear this as well, there's some reasons why that is. So generally speaking, when we're talking about magnesium, we also want to see, okay, so how prevalent is like a magnesium deficiency, and or just deficiencies of different types of vitamins and minerals. Approximately 60% of adults in the United States don't consume the recommended daily amount of magnesium. And one of the studies, or a couple of studies that they did with athletes, which have been listed in the show notes, is that it seems they've done a lot of different food questionnaires and food diaries and tried to assess for the amount of magnesium that's being taken in. And they found that in these population groups of these athletes and teams, they were not consuming, just in general in their food, enough magnesium. So it's probable that really what's happening here is that we're just not eating a higher density of those types of foods. But then also later on in this podcast too, we're going to also talk about how when we cook our foods, magnesium tends to kind of make its way out. So we'll dive in there in just a bit. So let's just talk briefly about why do we actually need magnesium? Well, first off, it is essential for creating or the synthesis of adenosine triphosphate, which is short for ATP, or ATP short for adenosine triphosphate. It is where you store your energy. So, and keep in mind, ATP is required for a lot of different things throughout the body, like glucose utilization, also things like synthesizing fat and proteins. You also need ATP for muscle contraction. So some different things there that we want to keep in mind. And obviously it's also where we get most of our energy from. It's let's see. And then it's also needed for neuronal activity. So, when you make a movement or you do anything or you think a thought, you're going to be, using those neurons. So you need magnesium just to make that happen. You need it for the release of neurotransmitters and even for cardiac excitability. So that's mainly just saying, you know, for your heart to function, you need magnesium because it's a muscle, right? So you also need it for it promotes dilation of blood vessels. And this can be really great for things like when we think about recovery. Typically, actually, and I don't know if this is talked about very much, but when we are looking at the difference between the way that men and women recover, the female body will tend to take all of the blood after you've worked out, and it will bring it towards the core. Whereas in the male physiology, what happens is usually the body takes all the blood and it shunts it out to the muscles. So one of the things that you can do as a female is take cold showers within 30 minutes. You know, it's always about this 30-minute window after exercise, but if you can do it, you know, pretty quickly after exercise and get in a cold shower and then do kind of hot cold, what will happen is the body will take that blood and it'll shunt it out to the muscles for better recovery. But the reason I bring that up is because what we're doing is we're messing with the constriction and the constriction and dilation of blood vessels. And that's how we move blood around. So you can kind of mess with that. Anyway, you need magnesium for blood vessels, for them to be able to dilate. So you can move blood into different places. So magnesium also has what I would call an anti-spasmodic effect on skeletal and smooth muscles. So we're just trying to prevent spasms. It's also a cofactor for over 300 different enzymes. And the only reason I mention that is because when the body does anything, it usually has something to do with an enzyme. But in order for that whole process to function, there's a lot of different vitamins and minerals that are needed in order for that pathway to do its thing. So if you're deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, it's pretty common that we'll see these just gaping holes where some of these enzymes just aren't able to do their job. And then you experience that as symptoms. So I bring that up because, again, it's a good point to talk about. But the last thing too that I wanted to mention is that when we're looking at magnesium, it's also extremely important for muscle contraction and also for relaxation. So I know it doesn't have a direct benefit on performance, but if you think about what actually physiologically has to happen in order for your body to do what it does when you're, you know, working out and training, you need some of these vitamins and minerals. They're insanely important or extremely important for a lot of those processes just to happen. Briefly, I don't really want to talk a whole lot about chronic symptoms and chronic conditions and things like that, but I did just want to state, because I know that I see athletes pretty often that have a chronic illness or are trying to get over that. And there are a lot of them that are affected by a magnesium deficiency, and they just kind of range from things like heart diseases to GI complaints, particularly things like constipation are one that I see the most, and magnesium can really help with that. But also things like musculoskeletal cramps, fibromyalgia, ranging to neurological conditions like migraine, restless leg syndrome, complex regional pain syndrome, to anxiety, depression, or panic attacks. You also see things like fatigue and just generally stress can be signs of magnesium deficiency. And so you kind of get the idea, right? There's a lot of different types of conditions that are all affected by magnesium. So sometimes it's just trying to, if you are dealing with any one of those, and there's quite a bit more that I didn't mention because I don't really want to bog this down with that. But if you are experiencing any of those, or you're kind of curious to know more, you might just want to look into that and just see if getting some nutrient testing might help to give you some ideas behind why you're experiencing those. Okay. Let's quickly move on here. So general requirements for magnesium are you'll hear, and I just chose for females just because I know what this with sports is all about. But you want to look for general requirements are around 300 milligrams per day for females. And that can increase slightly to around 350 milligrams during pregnancy, but it drops back down for during lactation and breastfeeding. Those are just, again, for your general everyday person. That's not for an athlete. Okay. So, let's just kind of remember that, one of the reasons why, and honestly why most of the general population tends to be deficient in magnesium is because of the what I would call a negative or deleterious effect of stress on the concentrations of magnesium. So generally speaking, stress on the body, whether that's from what you consider like a high stress job or, times of high stress when we've, been dealing with different things in your normal, everyday life, or if you just consider what exercise and training, day in and day out, what kind of stresses we put on the body doing that, it's the same thing. It'll have the same effect on the body. And magnesium is often affected by that stress. So again, you need more magnesium if you're continually, adding stress to the body. You're just going to process it so quickly. Not only that, but higher amounts of magnesium may also help not only treat but prevent chronic conditions like heart disease. I also mentioned already hypertension. Migraines are a really big one here with magnesium. Again, kind of referencing to the beginning about how magnesium is really helpful for dilating blood vessels. Migraines can have a little bit to do with a constriction and dilation in the brain. Also things like anxiety, kidney stones, and one that I don't think is often known, because you always hear bone health, you think calcium, sometimes vitamin D, but you actually need magnesium for bone health. A lot of magnesium is actually stored in your bones. So making sure that you have higher amounts of magnesium can often help to prevent things like osteoporosis. We need healthy bones for athletes. And when we start to see issues with nutrition in athletes, we start to see a breakdown in bone health, stress fractures being one of them. So making sure that you have enough magnesium is pretty important. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, just because I want to make sure that as we're talking about nutrition and changing things to all of that, magnesium can interact with a lot of different medications. Oftentimes it's helpful to take magnesium away from medication so we can try to prevent any possible negative interactions with those. But what I generally just say is, if you are going to try and add different types of vitamins and minerals to your routine and you do take medications, just talk with your physician first and just make sure that it's not going to interact negatively with those. As with everything you should do when you're learning anything on the internet, you should always talk with your physician. Okay, so there's also, before I kind of wrap up here and we talk about where you get good food sources of magnesium and also what to look for in a supplement, there's a couple of vitamins and minerals that actually interact with magnesium when you take them. So I just wanted to mention them briefly because we are going to talk about these minerals and vitamins later on. So the first one I wanted to start with is potassium, which you hear a lot, like eat a banana when you are getting muscle cramps, right? So you also need magnesium for that. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that potassium, when you're trying to actually absorb it and bring it from your blood or serum into the cell, magnesium is necessary for that process to happen. And there were a couple studies that show that if you are low in potassium, you should also be supplementing magnesium at the same time, because it just helps to increase absorption of it. So you'll bring your levels up a little bit higher and a little bit quicker and more efficiently. So it's helpful to note just that it's not just about, taking potassium. And I think this is why I stress eating whole food, because oftentimes when you get a certain type of mineral from a food, it usually comes with an enzyme or some of those other vitamins or minerals that are needed to make sure that they're available to you to absorb, versus just taking a supplement, which is in its, solitary form. So it's solitary form, excuse me. Okay, then moving on, you also need magnesium for vitamin B6 uptake. So vitamin B6 is really helpful for having a healthy period or menstrual cycle, but it's also helpful for things like premenstrual syndrome, asthma, and kidney stones. And what was interesting about this one is that vitamin B6, not only do you need magnesium for the uptake of that, but you also need vitamin B6 for the uptake of magnesium. So just a couple of fun things there that just different things that you need for making sure that you're absorbing different vitamins and minerals. There was also one more. There's a couple, but the other one that I wanted to mention was zinc. Most people don't take enough zinc, and I'm talking here about like 100 milligrams of zinc in order to treat something. When you take that amount, there's some studies that showed that you can actually deplete your magnesium stores from taking that much zinc. So it might be helpful if you are treating with zinc for whatever reason in that high amount. You should probably think about supplementing with magnesium. But most general people, when they take zinc, it's usually like 25 milligrams. So it's not something to be worried about too much. But again, it shows that when we start to increase different types of vitamins and minerals into the body, we see these interactions that happen with different types of the other sources of vitamins and minerals. And it's just part of how the body absorbs them. It's how it uses them, all of it. Okay, so what are some good sources of some good food sources of magnesium? So things like nuts, whole grains, legumes, leafy greens. Also, so all leafy green types of veggies, fish, meat, even actually dairy products can be a good source of magnesium. The problem, and I referenced this earlier, is with preparation. So around 50 to 75% of magnesium is lost in the water when vegetables are boiled. So sometimes I'll recommend that people steam their veggies. Roasting can help as well. But this is also why, particularly with magnesium, especially with athletes and in times of high stress, it just might be easier to consider supplementing with magnesium just to replace what you've lost, just because it can be a little bit tricky to get some of these things from, to get magnesium from food, especially when you have to cook it. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get any. It just means that, when you do cook them and when you prep them, we do lose some of that vitamin and mineral load. Okay, so what to look for in a supplement when you're trying to figure out what do I do? Especially if you've done this before, you may have seen that there's a lot of different types of magnesium and can get a little bit overwhelming. Just even for me, sometimes I have to go back and I have to look up what's what. But okay, so for magnesium, you'll see things like magnesium oxide. You might see things like magnesium lactate, glycinate, magnesium citrate, aspartate. You might even see something like a slow release enteric-coated magnesium chloride. There's magnesium hydroxide, sulfate, even I've seen magnesium amino acid chelate. There's a lot of different types of magnesium. And honestly, I just tell people to look for 3 different types, usually magnesium oxide, lactate, glycinate, or citrate, or 4 different kinds. So, and I will say magnesium oxide is probably one you're going to see the most. It's not the most ideal preparation of magnesium, but it's the most common and it will do just fine. I definitely prefer to stick to that, either oxide, citrate, or glycinate, for a couple of different reasons. Those 3 in particular have been helpful for treating constipation, but also for things like muscle cramps, tight muscles, and spasm, stuff like that, which are generally the things that I treat in the office, right? We want to make sure that people have healthy muscles so that they can do what they do in their sport. But also, I would say the ones that are more bioavailable, again, when I say bioavailable, I mean you're able to absorb it a little bit better. So magnesium citrate and glycinate are a little bit more popular in that sense because you are able to absorb them a little bit better than the oxide form. But again, magnesium oxide is the most common. And even though it's not the most optimal form, there were several clinical trials that found that it was still pretty helpful for treating migraines, for treating things like hypertension, premenstrual syndrome, I mentioned, PMS, even restless leg syndrome. So just a couple things to keep in mind. The last one too, oftentimes when you start to increase magnesium and how much to take, it can cause things like GI distress or diarrhea. Magnesium glycinate seemed to reduce that a bit. It didn't cause GI distress quite as much as some of the other ones. But when you start to creep up, into 300 to 400 milligrams per day and above that, it can start to cause some GI distress. So if you are needing to get more than 300 to 400 milligrams of magnesium a day, what I typically recommend is having my patients just split it up in the day. So you can take it 2 to 3 times a day. And just because you're not taking so much at once, that can be one way to get in more magnesium and not have it cause GI distress. Okay. And on that note, that is our episode for today. So you'll be able to see links to the references that I mentioned throughout this podcast on wispsports.com. Please make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and you can also find me on drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com. You can always leave a direct message with us over on social media as well. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back in a few weeks with another breakdown of a specific vitamin or mineral.